Welcome, Darklings, to Season 3 of the Reign of Blood podcast. I'm Ember, one of your hosts, here to introduce you to the shadowy depths of what hopes to be our most sinister season yet. This season, your unholy trinity of organizers and hosts, Miss Kitten, Radically Dark, and myself, have entirely way too much fun with the Summer of Stabs, our 80s horror-themed series that promises to be both educational and thrilling. Our aim is to explore the macabre beauty that lies in the shadowed, or maybe not so shadowed, spaces of desire. Leading up to Reign of Blood Nightfall, our advanced Halloween extravaganza, we'll be discussing topics such as embodied and informed consent, risk mitigation, and other helpful tips, ensuring that every prick, slice, and puncture is as thought through as it is sensational for you. We'll also continue interviewing sharps enthusiasts from around the world to find out what makes the blood-loving heart tick. And maybe we'll talk Miss K into recording some more horror meditations for us. Join us as we explore the eerie, the edgy, and the exquisitely sharp. This is Reign of Blood, where the macabre meets the magnificent, and the only limit is your imagination, risk profile, and informed consent. Let the Summer of Stabs begin. But first, a content warning. This podcast is not suited for individuals who are not legal adults, are not interested in heavier BDSM practices, who are presently having severe mental or relationship health concerns, or who do not already understand basic BDSM practices regarding consent, ethics, risk mitigation, etc. Topics may include things like mental health issues, social issues, injustice, blood and sharks, of course, medical trauma, medical issues, trauma of various types, and more. Listener discretion is heavily advised.
Hey, amazing shops lovers, I'm back and I'm really excited. I have Andrew in my dungeon virtually all the way from North America. I'm always excited to connect with people across the sea, and this human has some really great needles and new needles and stuff coming up. So I won't ruin it for him. I'll let Andrew do the talking. But welcome, Andrew, and thank you so much for joining Reign of Blood and me, Miss Kitten, tonight in the dungeon.
Thank you, Miss Kitten, for having me.
It's really great to be able to connect with you. I have to punt Mel Sprinkles here because this was her contact, and she said, "Don't give up. Keep reaching out. Make sure you get him." So she definitely is admiring your needles, and they have definitely become part of something that she really enjoys using. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the shop and the needles and that, and then we'll go into a little bit more about you as a piercer and your journey with needles.
Absolutely. So Mel, actually, we had some 5-inch needles made for her because she does a lot of the play piercings. Um, and it took us about 3 to 4 months to get them made, but now we have a lot of them, and we, as piercers, use them a lot now too, just because of her recommendation on having them made. Um, the shop I work at is called Only Piercing in Burlington, Washington. And then the needle company is called That's the Point. And we really like taking ideas from recommendations and making them come to life.
I absolutely love that. I know that for our first season of Reign of Blood, we spoke to Mel about a piece she had done using long needles in the neck, and she'd used spinal needles, and they'd been quite hard to pierce with. The bevel's really short on a spinal needle, and they're just difficult to work with, and they bend quite easily, and they weren't ideal, but she had still managed to do an amazing piece. And when I spoke to her then, she was desperate to find a different needle and reach out. So I'm really glad that she found you, because I do very much love the piece that she did with your needles. For anybody who hasn't seen it, I like to poke holes on Instagram. I don't know what you're doing with your life if you're not following Mel Sprinkle's work. She's just an amazing human and an incredible piercer. Still fangirling over the amazing woman. But yeah, so I spoke to her at that point and we discussed the spinal needles because we use them too, and we discussed and we both were sort of at a loss. Where we are based, we don't have access to anything. We have a very limited access to piercing needles. We have one supplier in our country, and we can only get one brand of needle, and we can only get one length of needle, and we can only get that length if it is available. So an order for piercing needles can take anything between 2 months and 8 months to get the
Dang.
needles. Yeah, so we do the real African version. A lot of my work, where you see hubless needles, are not piercing needles. They are surgical needles that we've cut the hubs off the back of them, because we just don't have an option. There's nothing else we can use, and we have a very limited length. So our length is what the doctors use, and that's it. So even the longer needles that MedFet and stuff sell, we literally can't get any of those. So super limited. So super jealous that you have this company and you make these amazing products. But also super excited because you make them accessible.
Yeah,
And I know that there's a bit of a story behind that, and I wanted to get you to tell the listeners a little bit about that.
absolutely. So, being second generation piercer, I actually remember when my dad would order needles and they were hubbed needles, so we'd have to cut the hubs off of them. That's actually where most needle companies started in the United States until I believe it was Katana's. They started making hubless needles specifically for piercers. Um, that's the point. The needle company I run, it's about 30 years old. My dad's owned it for 10, and we used it at our shop since 1997. So growing up, um, saying that's the point out loud, like in the shop, was a big no-no because we didn't, as a piercer, you didn't want to share your sources. And that's kind of how I was raised, is we didn't share our sources um, when we were first starting in the 90s. But as we spot, that's the point. It was something that was to help other piercers because we used it for so long in our shop that we knew it was good stuff and we just had to add to it. So accessibility for piercers, since we've owned that support, has been kind of the number one thing. You saying that it takes sometimes 3 to 8 months to get needles is bonkers to me because for us, our turnaround is usually about less than a week. So when someone does an order, we try to get it at least shipped the same day. So then we know it's getting there really fast. And that's something that we've done the whole time. That's the point, because there's companies that it takes 6 to 12 months to get your order from, and as a piercer, it doesn't always work well like that. So accessibility for us is a huge thing. And then always taking recommendations. We take a lot of recommendations from people that have used their needles for over 20 years. Some people have only used their needles for a couple months, like Mel, and we still take the recommendation and turn something amazing out of it. And that's one thing with that's the point, is like I'm still actively piercing. And I really I've used everything across the board. But with that's the point, it's accessible and it works very, very well for what you're doing. The spinal needles, I've tried those and it's not as much fun, I would say. With the 5 inch needles, they are really long, so it's a little intimidating at first, but they glide. It's like going through butter. It's really weird. Um, and yeah,
It relates to the going through butter thing. We obviously don't have huge access to piercing needles, but we do order them and we do wait at the post box, like abandoned children, for them to arrive. And so in my journey, I had never pierced with anything that was a smaller gauge than a 16 gauge, because we can't get surgical needles that are smaller than a 16 gauge. So preparing to do a 12 gauge preparing to do a 12 gauge piece, was really like, it was like a 5 month wait for me to get the needles, and then they eventually arrived and it split the box between two of us, and we did the first piece on the first human and the second piece was for my piece. But I was so nervous because a 16 gauge surgical needle, the bevel is really short and stumpy.
Yeah.
So it's quite a harsh device. There's nothing sexy about a 16 gauge medical needle. It's not designed to glide into the skin. And I have to say, like just using the bevel on that 12 gauge piercing needle, just having the privilege of being able to put that through my skin was such an incredible experience for me. And it just like I get the butter thing because it was like it just slid in. There was like you read all the stuff about drag and in your beginning journey you're expecting all of that drag, and sure there is when you get down to the single gauges and it does come, but there was far less drag on that 12 gauge piercing needle than there was on a 16 gauge surgical needle. I was thrilled. It was a great piece. I really enjoyed it.
Night and day difference. That's so one thing too about our needles, the walls of them are thinner, and then we have a shorter bevel compared to some companies. But then they're also nylon, medical grade nylon coated. So with us, I don't crush my bevel. I know there are piercers that do crush their bevel, so they don't have to implement bevel theory. But with bevel theory, with these needles, they just glide, and that's, I mean, as a piercer, it's great on my end, but then as someone that, because I love getting pierced, so I actively get pierced. But as someone that gets pierced as well, it's a lot more comfortable. It's not as intense and it's not as much pressure when you're pushing a sharps through, and it's just overall more bearable.
Yeah, it's definitely more bearable. I will support that. Talk to me a little bit about coating on the needles, and I kind of know in my head that I've read a couple of pieces that needles are coated, but that's probably where my level of education with this ends. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've tried non-coated needles. I've actually had some requests to create some non-coated needles. The reason why we create the needles we create is for precision. Um, so the one thing with bevel theory, some people I know they don't use bevel theory because they crush their needles, and that's when you crush the bevel of it, and you're creating it to be flat. And so when you do that, you don't have to worry as much about your bevel theory because you're not trying to implement the geometry of the needle because it's like a triangle, right?
Yeah.
So when you crush that bevel, usually, like I've tried it on larger gauge stuff, and it's so that you don't have as much tissue trauma on the exit or a blowout. So on large gauge stuff, you can see like a little flap of skin sometimes if it's like a 6 gauge or an 8 gauge. Well, when you crush that bevel, it is supposed to take that away. And then it also, my main thing with it is I wouldn't tamper with my needle out of all things. Like I create tools to pierce like L-bent receiver tubes for tragus. Um, but when it comes to the sharps, I try to leave them as they come. That way I'm not gonna distort it at all. The nylon coating on it, that really helps the smaller bevel just glide instead of pop pop when you enter and exit. It's more just one solid movement. Um, with um non-coated needles, there I have tried them. Like some people use lubricants when piercing. I do as well, even with the coated, but with the non-coated, I would feel like it's for better control because when you're using one of our needles, you can the second you open it, you can immediately feel it is a little different compared to others. Like it's lighter, and then the coating on it, you can feel the coating. But personally, overall comfort on the person getting pierced. I think that
I love
that is,
that. I want to talk about two things that you mentioned here. First of all, the non-coated needles that I know in our country are um, morticians needles and autopsy needles
that's
are,
awesome.
yeah, are non-coated. So we do use them in
Yeah,
kink, and they are super sadistic. So sternum needs that type of needles into the sternum is like a super hard sadistic play. Um, probably a few people's fantasies. And like you can make that sexy too. Like if that's your
Oh yeah.
fantasy, I'm not judging, and that can also be super sexy. I have someone in mind here. Actually, I've got a big smile on my face when I'm talking about this. So, there's definitely a place for that. But I like the idea that the coating helps with the precision, because when you're doing work like Mel's work that is really artistic, and there's so precision counts for so much in the piece. The more that you can have that much precision, and have an easier tool, the easier your job is as a piercer. So I really love that. I think I'm gonna have to connect with you and order some needles.
Absolutely. Whenever you're ready.
I absolutely love that. And then tell me a little bit, you're a second generation piercer. This is something that you've obviously grown up seeing. So body modification is not something that you discovered on your own. But why do you love it? And yeah, why not choose a muggle life, and why follow piercing?
That's a really good question. I actually did follow Muggle life for a long time. And I feel like with that, the lack of people understanding who I was as a person, it almost drove me a little crazy. I ended up becoming not only a workaholic but a drug addict, and I got into piercing, and it honestly saved my life. I got clean up because I wanted to pierce, and it really helped open me up as a person. So for me, getting back into piercing after all of that, it was like getting back to my roots and getting back to kind of my truer self, and not being afraid to be my true self. So now, like with body mods too, my dad was one of the guys in the late 90s who was doing double zero gauge punches on his helixes by himself, or doing like double 6 gauge PA on himself. And for me, that like he didn't. I have a lot of heavy mods. I have a lot of some blackout tattoos too. So I'm to the point of no return. But for me personally, that helped me kind of commit to something, and not in a bad way, but commit to this like my life depended on it, because it did. So with piercing now, it's a form of healing for me, and some people it's not that, and that is amazing. I love that there's different paths you can take with just body piercing. It's not one or the other. It's whatever you create it to be on your side. So for me, it is a really big healing aspect. So like when I go get a play piercing, especially from Mel or from Zach, it's a way I can almost test myself. And even if I don't complete it, I still got in the chair. I still took the drive. And then, a lot of people see that and they're like, well, why would you do that? To me, it's completely normal. I grew up with BME as our homepage on our computer screen at our shop and at our house. Like, modified the movie where people are doing human suspension, and some of the other ritualistic piercings. That was one of the 9 DVDs we had on our DVD collection growing up, and we didn't have cable. So like it's a little different for me because I did grow up around it. I feel like with my dad, he did open the door, but he made it my decision to, like, if you want to do this, you can. You don't have to. And that's something that I really appreciate him for, along with always being innovative. We're both Fakir alumni, and one thing with that, I feel like that was a really good stepping stone, because it did help me be innovative as a piercer and not just be like, okay, well, I can't figure it out. That's the end of it. And same thing with him. There's like, I remember he did a big libret on himself, and he used a punch, but the punch didn't go all the way through. So he had to end up scalpeling the rest of it. It was pretty brutal, but some people would have just been like, okay, I don't have it. I need to stop. And a lot of piercing is just figuring it out. It's still a baby industry, in my opinion, with some drastic changes within the last 15 years. Um, but I think that there's other good changes to be made as well, and other outlets, not just for people that work at shops, but suspension crews, play piercers, people in the kink community. And one thing too, with being Fakir, like that was a big part of one of his alter egos, was part of the kink community. Same with his partner Cleo.
I absolutely so I related to so much that you said there. I wanted to say I think that the experience of needles for me has been something that has really empowered my life. And maybe my journey is not identical to yours, but the fact that I woke up and implemented self-care, and a process of being more ethical with my own body, more ethical with my own choices for my own body, and being proud of taking care of my body because there was a point in my life where I didn't do that. So kink has really given me that, or piercing in kink has really given me that. Just this admiration for the canvas that I carry, and its ability, and then my personal responsibility for taking care of that so that it heals well and that it stays elastic and it stays beautiful, and just showing appreciation for that was a very big step forward in who I was as a human being, because I think otherwise I might be dead. So I just it was a very healing journey for me too. So I loved hearing you talk about that, and I think you should be really proud of that self-awareness. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you for being so authentic and sharing so openly, because I don't think you are the only one that has experienced that type of journey. And it's really great for other people listening to be able to say they relate to that. And I also think that um, what you're talking about it with the piercing community, my country is very small and very isolated. So yes, there is a whole bunch of changes in the last 15 years as far as piercing industry goes, but they haven't filtered down yet. Because the internet provides us with easy access to information, the idea of mentorship isn't as important anymore. So when you have limited access to education, mentorship is always the first prize. That's great. But when you have limited access to resources for mentorship in person, you're going to do the stuff anyway. You're just going to do it without a mentor. So the piercing community here in particular is incredibly closed. They don't want to share information. I don't know if it's out of a fear for their business, or if it's out of a fear for losing customers. But they are very, we can't buy needles from them. We can't access that. They won't help us with information. It's just very shut down, and it's very difficult to get things out of them. Yeah, so it's limiting because there is a lot of crossover. There's crossover, like you're talking about the hook suspensions and the suspension crews. I mean, we don't seem to be able to connect that down here, and it's slowly opening up because of the global community and the access to global education. And I think that that is really great to hear you talk about it so openly and want to share the information and share the product and yeah, share accessibility. I think that accessibility word in the piercing community is something that I haven't heard connected together before.
Yeah. Um, One thing, gatekeeping.
Yeah.
I was raised like when I being raised in this, it was all about gatekeeping. Um, the one thing for me, I got the information from my dad, and then it was like, okay, if you want to be here, you can. If not, okay, figure it out. So like I ended up working at a tattoo shop, and this tattoo artist thought he could pierce, which was it was bad. It was all bad. So like as for me, I had to go through a lot of like I knew what was wrong, so I knew what to look for. And then if it was wrong, it would be like, okay, well, I can't be here. I can't be around this person. Um, so like having the information even at our fingertips now, because I mean, most people have phones, and I think that's amazing that we have that. In the same token, it can lead to bad experiences, just even having the information, that's huge. But being able to physically do it is the part that I feel like we're trying to bridge. Because like you've said, even if you don't have a mentor, you're gonna end up trying it, and then that puts you in that dark corner. Which isn't It's not always a fun place to be, in that dark corner, but I do understand learning, and the learning part, the one thing that I truly believe with my heart and soul is with piercing, you can't ever not be learning. Doesn't matter how long you've been piercing. Doesn't matter where you're at as a piercer or what kind of piercings you're doing. Always learning is the main answer, because then it shines some light, and then it always just keeps improving from there. Um, and I think that's a really big part of body piercing. That's why for me it works very well, because I mean I won't get bored, you know. It's, if you're always learning, there's always something to do or something to improve on. And accessibility, I don't believe in gatekeeping myself. Like talking about needles and bevel theory, that's something that I like to talk to my clients that I'm piercing about, because to me, some people have this idea that anybody can do this. Realistically, yeah, anybody can poke a needle through their ear, right? But to get it to heal, or to do like what Mel does, where it's a whole intricate piece of art, like that is something that not everybody can do. Especially like with the play piercings, how intricate she gets. That is amazing, and that takes so much time and energy just to be able to get to that point. Um, and the one thing is not having an expectation for it either. So, like I know in the States, a lot of people use Instagram to help promote their work. Some people just do it as a portfolio. That's kind of what I use my Instagram for. Um, and then some people really, really, really try to blow their Instagram up, but they don't pierce as much. So they try to have nicer pictures, we use better quality jewelry. Um, and I feel like having no expectation for it and just doing it for the sole purpose of doing it and seeing it come to life, I think that's one of the more authentic ways to go about it, instead of just getting like Instagram famous, you know. And that's one thing. That's why I love and respect Mel. She didn't do it for that. She just wanted a different outlook on piercing and started doing corsets. And she stuck with it for a long time, and is, in my opinion, she's like the modern day representation of someone that does play piercings and does them phenomenally. And recently, even I've been trying to do some plate piercings, and like I said, it is a whole different outlook on piercing, and it's, you know, the way she does it isn't the way that my brain proceeds to do it. And there's even more room for growth, which is like I love that part. I think that's something that anybody interested in piercing should always consider. Is it's as long as you keep trying to grow and improve and learn more, it can turn into something amazing. But it's also never ending.
And it's so interesting listening to you talk. I think we go into I think when I started off in play piercing, people like Mel were my role models, and they still are, but that is really frigging imposing work. So when you start off, there is no way that your work looks like Mel's. There is no way.
No,
I
no.
think I think it took me about a year to publish a picture of my work, because I was comparing myself to this amazing human being who had this amazing talent and craft, and her craft extends past just throwing the needles. Her craft extends to the planning and the precision in placing the stencil. And like there is like I have seen her homeroom with her plan of what she's doing and how she sets it out. And I mean, it is a whole theater experience
Yeah,
that it literally takes as long as putting a play on. Like she's planning, and she's working on it, and she's active, and she's putting in so much time and energy into one piece, and that's why it looks like that. She's not just sitting down and throwing 20 needles into a human being. Like it's enormous. So, but you don't understand that in the beginning, and you only see the finished product, and it's really imposing. And I then you get a little bit. Then one day I saw a picture of Mel's work from like when she just started, and she was really proud of where she had started from and where she was. And I think that that was like a catalyst in the change in my journey. And I was like, if Mel started somewhere and she improved, like I'm never gonna get to that level, but I feel so much more confident in knowing that it's okay to be where you are. Like you don't have to have the perfection and the brilliance. And it's, you know, it's practice doesn't practice is never going to make me melt sprinkles, but practice is going to make personal for me.
yeah,
So my journey changed a lot at that point, because I didn't practice to be perfect anymore. I just practiced to be personal.
Yeah.
And the more personal I got, the more intimate my sessions got, and the more I enjoyed myself, and the more I just found the release of the experience and the intimacy and the experience really what the whole drive was for me, and just found some joy in it, and I find absolute joy in it now. So yeah, but you don't have to, you don't have to compare yourself to anything else out there. And
Exactly.
I think just having that open, so hearing you speak about how you just have to keep an open mind and just remember that there's always room for everybody to improve. And you shouldn't be comparing anything. You can write down your best and worst from a session, but you need to find the joy in the moment in what you're doing, and the experience, I think, is so important.
I agree. There was a when I first got back into piercing, there was an old suspension guy that told me, "Don't forget to have fun with it," because that's what we're doing. That's the whole experience is you're trying to enjoy it. So don't ever forget that part. That's another thing, no matter what piercing it is, whether it's a plate piercing set or it's just earlobes or standard nostril piercing, the experience that's given to the person in the chair, that's to me, that's all that matters. And it heals if it's just something for the little bling piece. But healing is huge, but the experience, that's what people remember.
And I think the healing thing is such an interesting part of this whole process, because the healing thing is where personal responsibility comes into the whole thing. And I think that, in my early years, sport was really easy for me. I could push my body, and I didn't really have to. Self-care and aftercare weren't really big things in my life. I could compete and do what I needed to do, and when it was something that just happened quite naturally to me. And as I got older, um, I needed to spend more time looking after myself so that I could still do the crazy things that I did when I was younger. But I didn't have any skill in the self-care and aftercare. And the one thing that I've learned about aftercare, and I now try really hard to pass on to the canvases that I pierce, is that aftercare is not a once-off thing. Aftercare is a continuous thing. And good aftercare is aftercare that's done every day, and not that's done like a once-off thing and that you forget about it, and then you're surprised when you have an infection, or you're surprised when it's not going well, and you're surprised that it's. And the good players, the players that show up ethically to play with me, are the guys that are good with their aftercare continuously. Like, it's part of their routine, it's part of their daily lives. So aftercare has become such a big question in how I look at choosing a partner to play with. So my kink, because I don't think you know my profile. My kink is CBT needles. So I do a lot of needles in people's penises, and I'm talking like 58 gauge needles in a cock. The aftercare for something like that has to be huge, and it's not something that I'm going to go home and help the guy with. So he's got to be responsible for that. Like, and this is a vital organ. It's not something we can neglect the aftercare with. So it's really interesting to see how my frame of choice of player has changed, and how I what I want to leave people with. And so now in my journey, it's not so much about how many needles I put in, it's about making sure that I've chosen a player that's going to look after themselves after I finish the session.
That's a huge part of it too. That is like absolutely huge part of it. That's one thing, like with conventional piercing, some people just think that they're gonna get it, it's gonna magically heal overnight. A lot of times when you go down aftercare and taking care of it, and hey, this is a process, it takes a lot of time sometimes. Or even if I say everybody heals different. That's something that not I don't know if a lot of people think I'm just fibbing, but no one person heals the same, and it's everybody that I pierce. Like I've had to let people know you're not taking care of this, and I know you're not taking care of this because I've had piercings I don't take care of, and this is what happens. But the aftercare part, I mean, I feel like it is a huge part, and it's for someone it might not work one way, and for another person it might work a lot easier. But the day having it as like a daily ritual almost, or part of your daily routine, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. Um, I also think that's awesome. What your main focus is piercing. That is amazing. That is so amazing.
Yeah, Mel's helped me design some really cool pieces as well. Like my real estate is limited, so it helps having somebody like Mel with some technical knowledge to help me find good real estate, especially when you're starting to throw 58 gauges down there. It's you run out of space pretty quickly. It's not like it's not like you have a back to work with. Um, just my because the self-care thing is my absolute passion, but um just making that routine something that's part of your life, and then being able to come to the table in an intimate setting like in kink, and being able to say to the partner that you're playing with, these are my needs, so that you're putting them on the table up front because you know what they are, because you're good at them, they're a skill, they happen in your life every time, just makes the play from like an average play to something that is so much more special, because you're able to provide the validation for the vulnerability and a little bit of help with the caring when people are low at capacity in the healing process. And it really is something that I think is missing. And kink is this wonderful, like neurodiverse smorgasbord. It's like designed for all of us who think slightly differently to other people, because we get to negotiate everything. So we get to discuss it all up front. We get to put everything on the table and say, these are our needs. Can you meet them? And the other person gets to consent and say, yes, I can, or no, I can't. And if they can't, you don't need to be upset. You can either fill that gap with a different person, or you can collaborate and find a different way to fill the need. But you get to know all this information up front. So you're not left with all these surprises afterwards, which like normal vanilla relationships tend to throw at you, all these like random like um you know uh, with the communication just seems to be so lacking in that frame of relationship. So yeah, so the people that are listening, your self-care is a huge part of your piercing journey, and the better you can care for yourself, the better you can come to the table with ideas on how to negotiate your aftercare and what your needs are. And I liked listening to what Andrew was saying about nobody heals the same way. So nobody's self-care looks the same. So self-care can, for me, could be chocolate cake, a long bath, and a walk on the beach, and salt water and ice. And for Andrew, I'm quite sure that chocolate cake, long walks on the beach, salt water, and ice would not be his first three that he would pick out of a hat. So, like everybody's a different, but I know what works for me, and I'm able to bring that to the table. So finding that in your journey, I think, is really important. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
I absolutely agree. Another thing too, what was it? Healing and aftercare. I mean, one thing like when I'm piercing too, I try to visualize it before I even have to do it. And if it's something that doesn't make sense or it's not going to work, I'm not going to lead someone down the wrong path by doing it anyways. Um, I love that with what you do, the communication. Like I think that is huge. I try to be a transparent piercer, meaning I'm not going to scare the person or freak them out, but I do want to be completely transparent with what's going on so that they know every step to everything I'm doing. Um, and like when you're doing a play piercing set, it's a little harder, I feel like, to do that. Because you like unless you have a stencil, of course, but it's harder to just get the image out of your mind and be like, this is what it's going to be, because sometimes it doesn't always turn out to be that way. But I do think with communication, especially with getting pierced, it's huge. It's a two-way street too. So I have a lot of people where I am openly communicating the whole time, but then they don't want to do the same thing, or they don't want, like, I with piercings, I don't recommend submerging into water, um, especially like lakes, rivers, anything like that. That's you just don't want to do that where we're at. And some people, I know they do that, but they don't want to admit it. And then they come in with issues with their piercings, and that's something that I feel like a lot of piercers have that issue where it's like they do good work, they use good stuff, they do a good piercing, but the lack of communication on the opposite end is huge. And that's I mean, I for me personally, I try not to like shame people or embarrass them because they didn't take care of it, because stuff happens. Um, but in the same token, it is definitely a two-way street with communication. Like, I mean, it feels like you're losing time almost if you're doing everything you can as far as communication, but the opposite person isn't, that you just did all that amazing work on. And I've had a couple people like that. I've also had people that like I've had to fire them as clients or people that I do sets on because it's like this isn't going to work. And like I said earlier, I don't like leading people down the wrong path. So like for me, I know where my limits are, and I will tell them, hey, this doesn't work. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to proceed with doing this anymore. And I think that's
I
something
think
with. Oh, go ahead.
I think you yeah, I think what you're saying there is that you're allowed to have your own boundaries. And
Yes.
I think that's super cool. And I think that the one thing that the kink lifestyle gives us is the fact that number one, we have to arrive ethically and risk
Yep.
mitigate the situation. So that means both parties need to have the facts. Even if the facts are not sexy and not cool, playing with fire means you're going to get burnt. So
Yep.
what are the risks involved? How do we mitigate the risks? Like my dungeon card for negotiation for sharps includes, when was your last STI, STD test? Um, is there anything on your results that you would like to share with me? And if people don't want to discuss that openly with me, it's not that they're a bad person. We just don't align then, and I won't play with them. That's a really big part of my life. My partner is vanilla. So when I play with a lot of blood. So it's really important that people are being responsible and they're able to recognize that. And then, like if the person is showing up without doing their homework or their research and they're expecting me to be doing all of that, we're not going to align ethically either. They need to be coming with their own questions. So what happens if this goes wrong? So what happens if we try this a different way? It's important for me that they're thinking about it and then they have their own autonomy. They're taking responsibility for themselves as a human being in the situation. So it's a bit different in a piercing situation where you're being paid to do a job.
Yep.
Um, and I think there is something, and it's sort of a crossover into the professional dom world where people are paying you for a service, and you expect that by them paying you, they have accepted the risks involved. But I do think that we're getting to a part in the world where consent goes both ways, and you as peers are also allowed to consent to doing the job.
Exactly. Exactly. I I really like that with with how you do it. It's equal amounts of communication on both ends. Like that's to me that is like that's amazing, and that sounds like a perfect world because then it's like okay, like when someone comes in and they have questions, I love that. But when someone comes in and they're like, "Hey, I read this and I was doing some reading or I was trying to learn a little bit more about what is actually going to happen when I get this done." I love that because then at least it's showing me they're proactive and that if I do give them more information, maybe I have a better chance at them following it. Um, Clay piercings, that is to me, that's a newer rabbit hole I'm going down. And aftercare for that is, I mean, it's a lot more simple. I love it. It's like the intimacy with clay piercing I didn't really understand until doing it on another human, and that was like, oh my goodness, there's nothing like that in my line of work with piercing. I mean, because it's so fast and you're not doing 140 needle count on someone's back. It's such a quick experience where it is intimate for that quick second but not ongoing. So the communication with a set versus just a piercing, I feel like it has to be a little more direct from both ends, because then it's like, hey, we're gonna get through this whole thing together, and communication with it's huge. I mean, I've had multiple sets that I tap out on because it's like, okay, this is too much, but some of it I might have not been communicating enough like, or my needs through that experience. And I think that's a really awesome thing that you get to deal with a lot more of, is just that overall communication.
I think when you're playing with like these big sets of needles, so there's obviously a biochemistry reaction that happens in the body when you pierce. This is why we do
Yeah.
it. There's for the top and for the bottom. This is why we do it. It's super fun and we absolutely love it. But we're releasing some kind of chemical into our body. Um, and when you're doing so many needles, you're releasing a lot more of that chemical. And there are ways that you can then take that chemical and you can play with it even more. So I do a class called Sensational Sharps, where we use a whole bunch of stuff over the piercing needles or around the piercing needles. The skin's awake and the skin's listening to you. And then you're able to take that skin that has the needles in it, and you're able to add sensation to them. So whether it's a little bit of electricity or a vibrator or some hot wax or just a feather, you can really flood that human's body with a whole bunch of different biochemistry, but that takes capacity. So when you're arriving for the set, you need to know where that person's at. And that means that they have to be well hydrated, no alcohol, good sleep. All of the things that encourage good healing also make for a great play. And without those things, you don't get to finish the set because the body doesn't have enough to give you. There's a limitation. The other thing that happens with that is there needs to be enough capacity to still adult ethically on a Monday morning. Because if you're flooding the body on a Saturday night, you can relate it to going out and partying and having absolutely no sleep. You still need to be able to go to work on Monday morning. So if you're a fit young individual, you can still do that. When you get to my age, it's not so easy to still have the capacity to party Friday, Saturday, and go to work on a Monday morning. My work suffers. So we then talk a lot about what is the capacity required, where are you at physically, and then that goes back to the self-care thing again. Like, can you add something to your self-care that gives you a bit more capacity, that gives you a bit more emotional capacity, a bit more physical capacity, even if it's just spending 15 minutes of quiet time preparing your intent before the session, or drinking water the week before, or whatever it is to add to it, but that you're looking after yourself and you're caring for yourself. So it goes back to that self-care thing again, and that self-awareness thing, just being aware that you need to be physically more able to through a session with 140 needles, so your capacity needs to be above a certain number, otherwise you won't make it through to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I spoke to Zach about the pieces that you've done recently, and he absolutely loved doing them. And I think his podcast will drop before I drop yours. So maybe you want to tell the listeners a little bit about your side of the those pieces, because it relates to what Zach said, and Zach was great to chat to, and so excited about his journey too, and the pieces he was doing.
Absolutely. So the set he was doing originally, I believe it was, I want to say it was close to 140. No, it was 152. Because the first day we were doing it on the chest the first day, and we got through 52 and I tapped out. Um, I also I was hosting for Zach, so I tapped out. Zach also drove 6 hours to get to my shop, so I felt really bad. And then I told him, because when I can't see a set through, and there's been a couple, so when I can't see a set through, I don't get upset, but I just get to that point where it's like I know I could have sat and got through all of it. Um, I almost see it as like a challenge to self, which it's part of the play piercing that I think I'm fully in love with. Is it's like a test, and you get to test yourself instead of having someone else test you. It's literally how can you sit there and psychologically get through it, emotionally get through it, and physically get through it. Um, I I tapped at 52, and then the next day we ended up uh, doing it on the back, and the back was a little easier, um, and I think it only took 45 minutes if I remember correctly, but we ended up doing 102 or 101 on my back to get the whole flail. So with that one, we used 2-inch needles, 5-inch needles with double weaves, and then we also had a couple that we had to put captive bead rings in to give it like a chain effect. Um, One thing too, because I've only been play pierced by 4 people now, because to me it really, being it is an intimate thing, I don't allow everybody to perform that with me or on me. So with that being said, Zach is like one of 4 people. Same with Mel, that have done that for me. And then um, the way Zach does it versus Mel, it's a little different. Like, but both of them are amazing at their own. So with Zach, I know that he could tell it kind of bummed me out that we didn't complete the set. So when I brought up doing it on my back the day after, I think he was like, absolutely. I feel like he was a little more excited that I saw it as a challenge and not like, okay, that's all that's the end of it. I didn't make it. I don't want to do it. Because that piece was amazing too. That was a really cool piece that he came up with. So that was one that I really did want to see through the complete set and not just wash out. And I mean, there's been a couple of them that I washed out, and I plan on getting done again, but I'll revisit it when I think it's time. Because sometimes I feel like I with talking with you, sometimes it's just not time, and I think that's something that's okay to make that conscious decision. Um, and back to maybe it wasn't enough hydrating or self-care a couple days to a week before. um, but I
I love
think with
that.
what's that.
I said, I love that. I love that. And I think the one thing I want to say to you listening to this is for me as a top, and I get to throw a whole lot of needles very often. I
Yeah.
have a lot of respect for my bottoms who come to me and say to me, today is just not the day. And
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to eat cake and chat about needles. We don't actually have to do them. And I have huge respect for the person who has enough self-awareness to be able to say to me, yeah, this is just not a good day for this. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be, it's not the Olympics. It's really like you're not getting a prize. The only person that you're pleasing with this experience is yourself. And
Yeah.
I think you, if you relate it back a little bit to the kink world, kink is about our fantasy. This is literally our fucking fantasy. Like we're doing this for ourselves. We don't have to please anybody else in our fantasy. So it's about you. So if you're not feeling it, you don't have to do it. And I think that it's the one place in life that you get to make that choice because you can't do that at work, and you can't do that in your family, and you can't do that with your shopping trip and the laundry and stuff like that. Those have to be done. This is stuff that you're doing because it's going to elevate you and empower you. So you really get to have a choice. So I love it. I hearing a lot about you exploring boundaries and finding them, and I think that your self-awareness is incredible, and it's really enlightening to speak to you about it. And I feel quite privileged to be able to hear you chat about it.
I super appreciate that. The one thing I've like with getting pierced or piercing, getting mods or tattoos, I feel like a lot of folks don't know what they can actually withstand through. So with play piercing, that's one thing. It's like pushing your limits. And I've had a couple people I do sets on. Even when I get a set done, I feel like some of us forget how emotionally involved getting pierced can be. Because I have someone right now, we just did a corset on their chest. We did it with 14 gauge captives, and I pulled it pretty tight, but I also did a double weave. So the last like 2 3 days, this she was kind of questioning like, am I supposed to feel this way? And it's something that I feel after sets too, where it's just like you're emotionally kind of extinguished. Like all your emotions are, you don't know what to do with all of them because they feel a little jumbled. And I think that with play piercing, it's something that has really helped center my emotions, especially getting it done, because it gives me time to reflect, especially if it's not a set that I finished. If it's a set that I didn't finish and I had to stop, I feel like it's really good to have those times to reflect on self. And that's something that play piercing has done for me. And that like, I mean, I have some people that they didn't even know how how much they enjoyed it, and then they get a couple play piercing sets, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, this is magic! Like this is what I've been looking for." But then there's also the people that they get a set and they're like, "This is not for me," and that's totally okay. But I think finding that balance within self in a set, I think that's one of the coolest things out there. Because you even said it's literally just you're not gonna do it and win an award or anything, but it's doing it and getting gratification within self. And that's, I mean, that's one of the coolest things to be able to find. And you're not hurting anybody in a way that they don't want to be hurt. You know, there's communication. Everything with it is just, it's literally like we get to play with magic.
Hey,
And
we get to, I think getting under somebody's skin is the coolest thing in the world. Like, there is nothing more intimate than being underneath somebody's skin. Like, it is the closest you can be to somebody's soul. And you're literally playing with their blood at some point. Like, it's really connective. It's, it goes to being like super intimate, and I have incredible friendships from it. It goes to being super sexy for in a couple of ways. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. Like it is just there's just no other vulnerability that you can share with somebody that's so intimate. Yeah, you can tell that I might like needles a little bit.
so that's one thing too that I didn't realize until getting consistent play piercing sets on myself and then doing more on others. Um, the blood part. Oh my goodness.
Right,
That's so much fun.
right,
Like it's that
right.
I've even talked a little bit to Mel about it because I I didn't know for the longest time, but one conversation was like I when the blood for me, when it's my blood on me, something changes. Like something in my brain chemically changes. And I know that when I'm doing play piercing, same thing. My breathing changes. Everything kind of changes when the blood starts. And for a lot of piercers, that part I feel like because you have to be safe with it, of course. But that's something that growing up in a piercing shop, no, that was like a big no, 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 no. Watch out for that. Be careful. But now, as I digress into play piercing and getting more sets, that's actually one of the parts I really look forward to. And some of the sets I've done have not bled. Like there's very minimal bleeding. So when doing the sets, I feel like the blood part is almost like the reward, um, because that part in itself is its own little endeavor, and it's amazing. Like that is one of my favorite parts with doing big sets. And I have a couple people where that's also their favorite part in getting a set is the amount of blood, which is, I mean, for this may sound weird, but my mouth is watering even talking about it. Like that's such a interesting part with doing the play piercings versus just a commercialized piercing.
And I think you are not alone. I think there are lots of people out there. I have the hugest smile on my face, and I have a needle paddle. So I have a paddle that is made that holds 20 needles, and
That is amazing.
we use it for spanking. So we warm the ass a little bit first, and then we spank with this needle paddle. And as you pull the needles out, the blood just flows down the back of the buttocks and down the thighs and onto your calves, and you just coat it in blood. And then you get to play with the human's blood, or somebody gets to play in your blood and paint pictures on your ass and your blood. And it is just it's the biggest release. It is the most divine experience on the absolute planet. And if you told me when I started piercing, one of my bottoms said to me, "Can we, when we do the removal, can we play with the blood?" And I was like, "Hell no." Hell no, we're not making a mess in the dungeon. We're going to be totally neat and tidy. Like this is medical. Like this is we're not here for the blood. We're here for the piece, and we're here to have the pretty piece, and the piece is going to be photographed, and that's the aim of the whole play.
Yeah.
And I look at my evolution, And now I'm like, oh, fuck it, just smack me with the needle paddle. Let's play with the blood. Like it's changed so much, and it's something that I find so much reward in. And it's something that sharing that with somebody is so fucking intimate and it's so special. But for me as a human being, that release, that feeling of that warmth running down over me, I don't think that I can top that with any other experience. And I've done a lot of crazy shit like that. For me is that just bucket list every time.
That's so the crown of thorns that Mel did on my head. That and the centipede bled amazingly. And that like the centipede, that was the piece that was like, oh, this is amazing. Because Mel asked, she was like, hey, do you want me to bib you up? Because at that point I was there for the experience. So I even told her, I was like, what would you like? And she was like, I like this part. So I mean, if you can just let it pour all over down your face, then that'd be amazing. And at that time, I didn't know that that was kind of a part of the whole experience, but I was open minded enough, and I was absolutely, yeah, let's do it. I was sitting on her chair, and blood's running everywhere, and it even pulled up in my belly button, and that was it was a very different experience, but it was magical, and that changed my perspective 100% on the end goal with the play piercings and the blood part. The crown of thorns, that removal was amazing, and then the blood part on it was absolutely amazing. But like you just said, that warm feeling running down your face or your body, there's something happens when that part comes out, and I love that. I think that it's part of the overall experience. And yes, being safe is a huge thing, but also enjoying the whole overall experience is that's I mean that's why we do it. It's for a self.
Yeah. I just want to tell my listeners that if you haven't been onto our Patreon, we have Solaris's Bleed for Me classes, which are probably um, super fantastic in safe blood play. And as much as both Andrew and I are celebrating playing with blood, I said it earlier, making sure that your partners and yourself are tested before you fluid bonded, and taking personal responsibility for how you play and what you're playing with is hugely fucking important, and it is a non-negotiable. So looking after yourself, you matter most. But Rain of Blood has some amazing classes on our Patreon. We even have blood consumption. So if this chat with Andrew and I about blood has sparked some thoughts in your head, there are definitely ways to negotiate this and to make it happen in your play in the safest possible way. And I have one of our Summer of Stabs classes next month from a great educator as well, also talking about blood. So stay awake, join our Patreon, and have a look out for our blood classes because there are some phenomenal blood classes, and there are definitely ways to do this. And yeah, I just wanted to say, Andrew, you are an incredible human. Thank you for sharing a bit of your journey with me. It's been a privilege to hear you speak so authentically, and I've just loved chatting.
Same. I really, really appreciate the time and the good conversation a lot.
Thanks, Andrew. And for all of my listeners, I'm going to drop Andrew's shop bio in the links. They are going to be a vendor at Rain of Blood this season. So I will put their stuff on all of our channels so that you can get hold of them for their amazing needles. Definitely something to look out for. I'd love some feedback. If you do buy their product, send us some feedback and show us some of the work that you do with it so we can tag them and that we can show it off. And then if you don't have a ticket for Rain of Blood, I don't know what you're doing with your lives, people. Our tickets have dropped. The early bird is open. We have a 20% discount at the moment. The stuff that you're going to see at Rain of Blood will blow your mind. I can't tell you who the educators are yet. It's a secret, and this kitten's really bad at keeping secrets. You all know that. So I'm sure I will spill the beans soon, but there are some phenomenal educators coming. They're going to show you stuff that will blow your mind. We also have a full on demand on our Patreon that will be available to ticket holders. And that Patreon will give you all the 101s, all your blood safety, all your blood pathogens, Bevel theory, all of that stuff is available on the on-demand. That is the companion that goes with our Reign of Blood educational event. If access because of finances is a barrier, you know that we always give scholarships, so reach out to us. We don't believe that finance should be a barrier to education, especially not in this community. We have BIPOC scholarships as well. Reach out to us. We're really happy to support you. Yeah, and then I hope you're enjoying the summer of stabs. We have face needles coming up. We have a blood class coming up. We have radically dark sensational sharps coming up. And we have some flesh binding that I'm doing that I've been very excited. I've been making monsters in my dungeon. So we hope that you're supporting us. We hope that you are supporting your sharps community and each other. We hope that you are having a fucking bloody good time. And from me in my dungeon, in a very cold and wet Cape Town, lots of love and bloody kisses. Good night.